Bunker 13, War Stories. If you are over 60, perhaps your parents told you stories about the war. If you are over 80, you remember it yourself. The sirens, the bombings, the fear. But there was something they never told you. Something that came too late to save, too late to prevent. Something so horrific that even soldiers who liberated concentration camps fell to their knees and wept. George Leitmann is 99 years old today. He still wakes up at night thinking about that day. Spring, 1945. Southern Germany. The day he learned that there is something worse than enemies killing enemies. It is when brothers kill brothers, and fathers hang their own children. This is the story your grandmothers whispered, the story your grandfathers refused to tell. The story of children who paid the ultimate price for something they never chose, and of the men who killed them simply because they wanted to live. These were the final days of World War II. April, 1945. Hitler was hiding in his bunker. Allied forces surrounded Berlin. Defeat was inevitable. Any rational person knew the war was over, but the most fanatical Nazis thought differently. If Germany was going to fall, it would not fall alone. All traitors would pay. All cowards would be punished. And to them, even a child who refused to die was a traitor. George Leitmann was born in Germany, but at 19 he returned as an American soldier, a member of the 286th Pioneer Battalion of the 6th United States Army. His father was not so lucky. He was shot in a field in Yugoslavia, not for a crime, not for resistance, simply because he was Jewish. George carried that pain every day, but nothing prepared him for what he was about to see. The battalion entered a small village in southern Germany. There was no fighting, no gunfire, only silence. The wrong kind of silence. Houses were closed, curtains drawn, no one in the streets. Then George saw the road, a country road lined with trees, and something was hanging from those trees. When he got closer, his heart stopped. They were bodies, small bodies, children, 15, maybe 20 of them, 10, 11, 12 years old, all hanging in a row, as if they were decorations along the road. George fell to his knees. Men who had survived Normandy, who had liberated Dachau, stood frozen. They had seen hell. But this was different, because they were not prisoners. They were not enemy soldiers. They were German children, killed by Germans. Slowly, villagers emerged from their homes, women crying, men with their heads bowed, afraid to speak. And then, in whispers, the story came out. 3 days earlier, SS officers had arrived. They brought weapons, Panzerfausts, anti-tank launchers, and they gave them to children, 10, 11, 12 years old. The order was simple: hide in the trees, wait for the American tanks, fire, suicide missions. The children took the weapons, not out of courage, not out of belief, but out of fear. And when the tanks came, when the ground shook, when they realized they would die, they did what any child would do. They dropped the weapons. And they ran. For one day they were still alive. The next day, the SS returned. No destroyed tanks, no heroic children, only terrified families. The orders came quietly. Gather the children, bring them to the road. Mothers begged. Fathers tried to intervene, but rifles do not negotiate. One by one, they were hanged, in the same trees where they were meant to die for the Reich, as a warning, as an example. Children killed for refusing to die. This was not an isolated case. Historians now call this the crimes of the final phase. In the last months of the war, fanatical Nazis murdered thousands of their own civilians, because to them, living was betrayal. Not Jews, not prisoners, not enemies, Germans, anyone who tried to desert, anyone who refused to fight, anyone who raised a white flag. They were hanged in public squares, shot inside their own homes, left hanging with signs that read, "I betrayed my people." Mayors who tried to surrender their towns without a fight, shot. soldiers who threw down their weapons, hanged, mothers who hid their children, executed. The logic was brutal and simple. If Germany was going to fall, it would fall on the weak. Fanaticism had completely devoured any remaining trace of humanity. George Leitmann never forgot that day. Today, he is 99 years old. He lives in Berkeley, California, with his wife, Nancy. He built a life. He had children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. But every day he still sees those trees. Every day he thinks about those children who only wanted to live. Every day he thinks about his father, shot simply for existing. And every day he asks himself the same question that haunts so many survivors. How could educated people, people who read books, who loved music, who had families, how could they do this? After 80 years of reflection, George reached a simple and terrifying answer. Because they chose to. No one forced them. No one compelled them. They believed it was right, that it was necessary, that it was heroic, because hatred and fanaticism completely blinded their humanity. And when you dehumanize others, when you place ideology above life itself, any horror becomes possible. George still gives interviews at 99 years old. Not because he enjoys reliving the trauma, but because he sees the signs. He sees hatred growing. He sees people being dehumanized. He sees fanaticism returning. And he warns us, it can happen again, not with swastikas, not with the same uniforms. But the essence is always the same. When you begin to see other human beings as less than human, when your ideology becomes more important than life, when you obey without questioning, when you choose hatred over compassion, that is where it begins. It always begins the same way, and it always ends in trees, in mass graves, in ashes. Those German children have no names in history books. They have no monuments, no gravestones bearing their names. They were buried in mass graves, forgotten. Official history barely mentions them. But George remembers, and as long as he lives, they are not completely lost, because witnesses matter, memory matters, and the only way to ensure this never happens again is to never, ever forget that it did happen. At the hands of ordinary people. People like your neighbors, like your co-workers. People who made extraordinarily evil choices. If you are over 70, you may remember the war. If you are over 50, your parents may have told you stories. Hold on to those people. Listen to those stories, because soon there will be no direct witnesses left. Only books, only documents, only voices like this one. And when the last witness is gone, it will be your responsibility to carry this memory forward, so that those children are never reduced to numbers, but remain eternal reminders of what happens when we lose our humanity. George Leitmann turns 100 years old in 2026. He is still here, still bearing witness. And his message to you, to your children, to your grandchildren, is simple. Never again. No matter who the enemy is, no matter the cause, no matter the flag, never again. Because the next time someone tells you that they are less than human, remember the children in the trees, and say no, before it is too late.